Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Happy fall. Welcome to fall, and welcome here. I'm Larry Erickson, and this is the Erickson Report. And we're going to start this time on the Erickson Report with a longer look at book banning. PEN America is the American branch of PEN International. This is a 100-year-old organization devoted to advancing and protecting the right to free expression, particularly the right to write and publish. As part of that mandate, PEN America keeps a watchful eye on issues surrounding the banning of books. On September 19th, it published a report called Banned in the USA, the growing movement to ban books in schools. It's an updated version of the report that it published in April. What it found is for the period from July 2021 to June 2022, that is for the 21-22 school year, PEN America's Index of School Book Bans has over 2,500 cases of individual books being banned, affecting 650 unique titles by 1,550 different authors, illustrators, and translators. Such bans occurred in 138 school districts across 32 states, representing over 5,000 schools and nearly 4 million students. As the report says in its opening sentences, quoting, "More books banned, more districts, more states, more students losing access to literature, more is the operative word." And that list I just went through is not likely to be complete. There are surely more. In fact, on August 10th, the Houston Chronicle released a report on book bans in Texas between 2018 and 2021 and found more than 1,000 such bans in just Texas in just that time frame. Now, among the 650 unique titles in PEN America's index, 41% explicitly address LGBTQ plus issues or have protagonists or prominent secondary characters who are LGBTQ plus. A fifth of those, about 9% of the total list, involve transgender characters or stories. 40% contain protagonists or primary secondary characters of color. 21% directly address issues of race and racism. 22% contain sexual content of varying kinds, including informational books about puberty, sex, and relationships, because as we all know, books aimed at teenagers about the changes that teenagers go through are unsuitable for teenagers. Now I noticed, yes, that's more than 100. Those actually weren't all the categories into which those books are divided. It rounds up to more than 100% because books could be in multiple categories. Anyway, nearly half of the unique titles on this list were young adult books. Obviously, then books for even younger readers were also being banned, but nearly half of them were for young adults. And of the bans listed in that index, 96% were enacted without following the best practice guidelines for book challenges from the American Library Association and the National Coalition Against Censorship. In other words, in 96% of the cases, just we don't care, we're just going to do it. We don't care if we're doing it right or even makes sense how we do it, we're just going to do it. Now you could try to look at this whole business about books in schools as a moral panic. Which is a repeated feature of American social life, from the Salem witch trials through the daycare panic of the 80s and 90s right up to today. Panics frequently involving the intersection of two features, two elements: save the children and our perpetual hangups about sex. In that way, this is no different, which can offer some comfort in the idea that while such panics usually leave a trail of destroyed lives in their wake, after time they do burn themselves out to the point where the people who got swept up in them are later on embarrassed to even admit they were part of it. However, why that's not comforting is that this one is different. This one does not seem to just appear out of nowhere like movements can do. This panic was manufactured and is being manipulated by the anti-democratic fascist right for ideological power and gain. The large majority of book bans and campaigns for them underway are not spontaneous. They not just got organically grow out of citizen concern. They reflect the work of two forces. On the one hand, you have right-wing dominated governments, state and local governments. In fact, that Texas Chronicle report I just referred to said that most efforts to ban books arise from a couple of politicians and from pressure from the state Republican establishment, not from parents. That's one. And on the other side here, we have a growing number of advocacy organizations that have made demanding censorship of certain books and even ideas in schools part of their mission. This is an organized campaign, one that PEN America Chief Executive Suzanne Nossel calls, quoting her, ideologically motivated and politically expedient. And she said engaging in what she called a concerted, organized, well-resourced push at censorship. Now, although this campaign actually started with lies about critical race theory as a means looking to censor discussions about race and racism in the wake of the protests over the murder of George Floyd, over this past year, apparently figuring they've got as much mileage over CRT, out of CRT panic as they're going to get, this campaign has morphed into a focus on LGBTQ plus issues and identities. A campaign frequently drawing on long-standing, denigrating, and hateful stereotypes that suggest that LGBTQ plus content is by its nature sexual or pornographic. Or at the very least, in the term used by some of the book banners and would-be burners, it's all pervasively vulgar, and in any event unfit for decent people, and especially unfit for the children. At the government level here, at the government involvement here, PEN America estimates that at least 40% of the bans listed in its index are connected to either proposed or enacted legislation or to political pressure from state officials or other elected officials to restrict the teaching or even the presence of certain books or even ideas in schools. But PEN America has also identified at least 50 groups involved in pushing for book bans across the country, operating in the national, state, or even local levels. Of these 50 groups, 8 of them have local or regional chapters that among them number over 300. 73%, 3/4 of these groups, including their chapters, appear to have been formed since 2021. These groups have played a role in at least half of the book bans enacted across the country during this most recent school year. These groups share among themselves with each other entire lists of books to challenge. They employ tactics such as swarming school board meetings, demanding new rating systems for libraries, using inflammatory language like grooming and pedophiles and pornography, and even filing criminal complaints against school officials, teachers, and librarians. Now, these varied groups do not share all the identical aims. They're not all exactly the same, but they have found common cause in advancing an effort to control and limit what kind of books are available in schools. Some of these groups actually espouse Christian nationalist views or extremely right-wing views, and many of them have mission statements that say they're geared toward reforming public education. Now, remember that, it becomes important later. More broadly, however, this movement is intertwined with the political movements that grew throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is where it gets really dangerous, because ultimately this is not just about schools. For example, the largest of these groups, the right-wing Moms for Liberty, has over 200 local chapters. It's gained notoriety for its anti-LGBTQ plus advocacy, for vehemently opposing COVID-19 mask mandates in schools, and for spreading the baseless and, frankly, on its face, idiotic story that one local district was putting litter boxes in restrooms for students who identify as cats. Another right-wing group cited in the PEN America report, Mass Resistance, has been designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group that, among other things, claims the January 6th attack on the Capitol was clearly a setup, quote unquote, and that there is a Black Lives Matter and LGBT assault on American schools. Now, the channels of influence and coordination among all these various groups they're not always clear, and the groups do range in size and in their impact. But their role in the book banning movement of the past year is a consistent theme seen in shared language, shared tactics, and even more importantly, existing as part of an overall strategy for long-term domination and Fahrenheit 451, here we come. Because while many of these groups use language in their mission statements about parents' rights or religious freedom, those are but masks to conceal their own racism, homophobia, and transphobia, and their intent to use other fears to make sure that their personal bigotries reign supreme over the rest of society. This is an organized campaign that intends to reach far beyond schools. It's not about rights, it's not about freedom, it's about power. And it needs to be recognized, responded to, and treated as the danger to our future that it is. Now, as a footnote to all that, knowing there's a lot more to be discussed as this caterwauling campaign does spread beyond school classrooms and libraries to public libraries and even to bookstores. You know, there were two Virginia goppers who went into court. He sued to try to force two local Barnes & Noble outlets to stop selling two LGBTQ plus themed books. Fortunately, their attempt failed because the law that they relied on in their suit was declared unconstitutional. But beyond all that, there was one aspect to all this stuff about banning books in schools that's not usually addressed, but it does deserve some notice because it underlines a lot of the wild claims about LGBTQ plus books in libraries, and because this is something that has been long dreamed of by the extreme right, always looking ways to advance their own power and privilege and using ordinary people as pawns. Because the thing is, these actually, although they are not just attacks on the rights of people of color or of LGBTQ plus folks. With their labeling of teachers, not just the books, but the teachers as pedophiles, with their insistence that every individual parent has the right to make decisions affecting every other parent. These are actually attacks on schools. They are attacks on schooling per se. They are in pursuit of the long-time dream of the elites to eliminate public education altogether, to get rid of a right to education and once again make education a privilege of the select few. Some people have said it openly. Back in 1980, when he ran for vice president on the Libertarian ticket, the late billionaire David Koch said, "We advocate," this is quoting, "we advocate the complete separation of education and state. Government schools lead to the indoctrination of children and interfere with the free choice of individuals. Government ownership, operation, regulation, and subsidy of schools and colleges should be ended." And then jumping now, most recently, North Carolina Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson said in his newly released memoir that the State Board of Education and Department of Education should both be eliminated, and we should adopt charter school methods with the idea of making, quoting, traditional public schools a thing of the past. Now, the right wing has been prepared to strive for decades to get Roe v. Wade overturned. Don't think they're going to be any less long-term about this. And we'll be back with 2 weeks of stupid right after a break. And we're back. We are back with a regular feature, 2 weeks of stupid, clowns and outrages. And we start, as usual, with the clowns. And our first clown here is the American mainstream news media. I've said many times that we are uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our media, and this is just the latest example. This is the lead sentence from an AP story for September 7th. Jeff Deal, a former state representative endorsed by former President Donald Trump, has won the Republican nomination for Massachusetts governor over businessman Chris Doughty, who was considered the more moderate candidate in the race. Okay, what's the issue with that? All right, you got to know this. Deal is a real, true red reactionary. He's a known figure in Massachusetts. He was in the state legislature. He was the Gopper candidate for Senate in 2018. He's a known figure. In the race for this nomination, he was always ahead from day one. He was never behind. He was always expected to win. But what did AP choose to lead with? Trump endorsed. As if that was the central issue, as if being endorsed by Tweety Pie was the most important aspect of this. Because in part, I blame Tweety Pie on the media. I mean, in part, I mean, Tweety Pie didn't initiate all the crap. He didn't initiate the conspiracies, the paranoia, the lurking racism, the constant terror at the prospect of change. I mean, I was writing about the angry white male and how he was driven by the feeling that the world was changing in ways that he couldn't understand and so found frightening, and that his anger was, at least in part, driven by the constant stress of living with an unrecognized fear. And that was in 1996. And certainly I was not the first one to say that kind of thing. I mean, Tweety Pie didn't create any of this, but he did recognize it and exploit it for his own gain. And back, I think it was in the spring of 2015, I was saying that you could know everything you needed to know about Donald Trump if you just bore one thing in mind. He's a real estate salesman, making grand claims of the glories of this and the horrors of that and the sweeping vision of the other. It's what he did for a living. He may be a fraud, a bigot, a sexist, a liar, and a grifter, but give him his due, he's good at it. And one of the ways he was good and is exploiting the media. He learned in New York City how to exploit the media. During the 2016 presidential campaign, he led the media around like it was on a leash. It was infuriating to me to see how every day he would say something provocative or outrageous or over the top, and every day the media would rush to drool over whatever it was he was doing or saying. And if you criticize the media for this, the answer you would get, as if in one voice, would be, well, you can't just not cover him. Well, that's true. Of course that's true. I mean, he's a major figure. He's the the presidential candidate of a major political party. No, you can't just ignore him. But neither do you have to day in and day out, make him the top of the front page lead story on the nightly news, as if whatever babble came out of his mouth that day was the most important thing for you to know or be aware of. That was a deliberate editorial decision, media, one you undertook for your own benefit, either because you thought it would get you a bigger audience or because you thought he was just more fun to cover than the rest of them. And even now, he's still doing it, and you're still falling for it. Even though Tweety Pie's favored candidates had mixed success during the primaries, it seems all you hear about are the wins. You have a case of a race between Smith and Jones, and Smith was endorsed by Tweety Pie. If Smith won, it was Trump-endorsed Smith wins. If Jones wins, it's just Jones wins with barely a mention, except maybe in passing, that the Trump-supported candidate lost. Which means that for that great mass of people who aren't following all these races closely, the overall perception is Trump wins, Trump wins, Trump wins, Trump wins. Now, none of this denies the messianic hold that he still has over a significant part, a minority to be sure, but importantly, a passionate and active part of the goppers. And even less does it deny the threat to our continued functioning as something at least approaching a republic that he represents. But it is to point out the responsibility that the media shares by helping to create and maintain that threat by having acted and continuing to act as a bunch of damn clowns. All right, on a more traditional sort of clown, if you don't know Star Parker, be grateful. Suffice it to say that she's built a career out of being a conservative black woman. All right, maybe it wasn't just that. Maybe there's something else. Maybe it's her insight into human sexuality. For example, back in 2018, she declared that Gay Pride Month is, quote, not much different from Kristallnacht, and also declared that the B in LGBTQ+ stands for bestiality. So, all right, it wasn't that, but at least now we know that wasn't a one-off. On September 18th, she told C-SPAN that a total ban on abortion would aid society because it will mean that marriage will begin to occur again. I personally wasn't aware it had stopped, but never mind. Marriage will begin to occur again, and marriage is a social stabilizer. The problem is, to her, marriage, it seems, has broken down, here's the good part, because, quoting, women are not controlling their sexual impulses and demanding marriage before they get sexually involved. So women not controlling themselves. You know, I didn't know those old Girls Gone Wild videos were supposed to be documentaries. Star Parker, true clown. Okay, moving on to the outrages. This first one may seem small compared to other things, but it's still so sleazy that it just drives me nuts. On September 12th, Starbucks announced two new benefit programs, one involving direct deposit into a savings account and another providing guidance on dealing with student debt. These benefits are available to non-union employees only. It's just another in a string of attempts by Starbucks and its multi-billionaire CEO Howard Schultz to quash the union organizing that has seen now more than 200 Starbucks locations unionize. Starbucks Workers United, labor leaders, progressive lawmakers, and the National Labor Relations Board have all accused the company of violating federal law in the course of that effort. In fact, in the wake of the first successful unionization campaign, that one in Buffalo, New York, the NLRB accused the company of violating federal labor law more than 200 times in the course of that campaign. This latest move follows other union-busting moves, including cutting the hours of workers who support unionization, sometimes to the point where they no longer qualified for benefits, raising the wages of workers who don't belong to unions, and after announcing it would cover the travel expenses for employees forced to go out of state for gender-affirming care, telling LGBTQ+ employees that if they unionize, they could lose that benefit. Now, the company's claim is that federal law limits its ability to offer the same benefits at locations where there's a union or a union drive going on, because that would be an unfair labor practice. But that is thoroughgoing crap. First, because it really doesn't apply if the benefits are company-wide and the contracts are site by site. And even to the extent it could apply, it doesn't, because the union has waived the right to make such company-wide benefits a basis for an unfair labor practice complaint. In other words, Starbucks is both a union buster and a liar. And that's certainly not unusual in corporate America, but that doesn't make it less of an outrage. All right, this one now is to be filed under the heading of, when they tell you who they are, believe them. On September 8th, a panel of the Democratic National Committee refused to allow a vote on a resolution aimed at banning dark money from the party's primary process. Dark money refers to money whose sources is disclosed, and it's often untraceable. In other words, you have no idea where this money came from. This primary season saw a deluge of dark money pouring into Democratic races across the country, specifically targeting progressives and bolstering powerful insider incumbents. It was a flood of money, and that in a number of cases did wash away progressive challengers. Now, led by Nevada Democratic Party Chair Judith Whitmer, the resolution would prohibited dark money funding during any Democratic primary election and establish procedures for investigating the use of dark money by candidate committees, as well as possible sanctions for doing it. Now, the Resolutions Committee blocked a vote on that resolution just after approving a separate toothless measure that, quote, condemns the use of dark money that runs contrary to the values and principles of donors, which is not only gobbledygook, I mean, what the hell does that even mean? But it also it's completely toothless. There's no penalties. In the wake of this refusal of a vote, Our Revolution, a group that supports progressive candidates, said there would be an attempt by a coalition of progressive DNC members to get that resolution to the full floor of the upcoming quadrennial party convention, despite the panel's objections. Now, apparently in response to this, it was a threat to their power, to the fee-fees of their dark money donors? Well, I don't know. Anyway, apparently in response, on the ensuing weekend, the Democratic National Committee itself quietly amended its bylaws, giving that narrower body the power to override decisions made by its members at those conventions. The new language of the bylaw says no such bylaw or amendment that the convention wants to adopt shall be effective unless and until it is subsequently ratified by a vote of the majority of the entire membership of the Democratic National Committee. Note that the DNC itself numbers fewer than 500. The convention will involve several thousand. In other words, faced with the progressive challenge of the party's increasing reliance on big money and corporate dark money donors and its continuing hostility to progressives, the party hierarchy first blocks a vote on the issue and then changes the rules so that even if a majority of on-the-ground party activists vote for something, it doesn't mean anything unless the party elite agrees to it. I've said it before. These people are not on our side. Some of them, yes, certainly, some of them are on our side, and even a significantly greater number are on our side on particular individual issues. But overall, as a party, as an organization, the institutional Democratic Party is not on our side, and it will only be on our side in those cases and to the extent that we force them to be, and don't you forget it. All right, we're going to close with this quick reminder here. 1/3 of Pakistan is now underwater in the wake of a super monsoon that hit on August 27th. On September 14th, Typhoon Miyufa hit Shanghai. It's the strongest tropical cyclone to hit that city since record-keeping began in 1949. On September 16th, the worst storm in 50 years hit the western Alaska coast. On September 18th, Super Typhoon Nanmadol struck Japan with wind gusts of up to 243 kilometers, that's 145 miles per hour. Also on September 18th, Hurricane Fiona hit Puerto Rico, dumping 30 inches of rain on the island, and as I do this, there are still 1 million people without power on the island. Can we please stop pretending that extreme weather has nothing to do with climate change? All right, that's it. We're going to get out of here. You just go have the best fall. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the fall weather. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. As always, peace.